as probably the most cosmopolitan of all cultures. But it's not. In many ways, it's the most parochial. Because for 200 years, the West has been so dominant in the world that it's not really needed to understand other cultures, other civilizations, because at the end of the day, it could, if necessary by force, get its own way. Whereas those cultures, virtually the rest of the world, in fact, which have been in a far weaker position vis-à-vis the West, have been thereby forced to understand the West because of the West's presence in those societies. And therefore, they are, as a result, more cosmopolitan in many ways than the West. I mean, take the question of East Asia. East Asia, Japan, Korea, China, etc. A third of the world's population lives there. Now the largest economic region in the world. And I'll tell you now, that East Asians, people from East Asia, are far more knowledgeable about the West than the West is about East Asia. Now this point is very germane, I'm afraid, to the present. Because what's happening, back to that chart at the beginning, the Goldman Sachs chart, what is happening is that very rapidly, in historical terms, the world is being driven and shaped, not by the old developed countries, but by the developing world. I mean, we've seen this in terms of the G20 usurping very rapidly the position of the G7 or the G8. And there are two consequences of this. First, the West is rapidly losing its influence in the world. There was a dramatic illustration of this, actually, a year ago, Copenhagen, climate change conference. Europe was not at the final negotiating table. When did that last happen? I would wager it was probably about 200 years ago. And that is what is going to happen in the future. And the second implication is that the world will inevitably, as a consequence, become increasingly unfamiliar to us, because it will be shaped by cultures and experiences and histories that we are not really familiar with or conversant with. And alas, I'm afraid, take Europe, America is slightly different, but Europeans, by and large, I have to say, are ignorant, are unaware about the way the world is changing. Some people, I've got a friend, an English friend in China, and he said, the continent is sleepwalking into oblivion. Well, maybe that's true, maybe that's an exaggeration. But there's another problem which goes along with this lack of, that Europe is increasingly out of touch with the world, and that is a sort of a loss of a sense of the future. I mean, Europe was once, of course, commanded the future in its confident, take the 19th century, for example. But this, alas, is no longer true. If you want to feel the future, if you want to taste the future, try China, as old Confucius. This is a railway station, the like of which you've never seen before. It doesn't even look like a railway station. This is the new Guangzhou railway station for the high-speed trains. China already has more of the bigger network than any other country in the world, and will soon have more than all the rest of the world put together. Or take this. Now, this is an idea, but it's an idea to be tried out shortly in a suburb of Beijing. Here you have a megabus. On the upper deck carries about 2,000 people. It travels on rails down a suburban road, and the cars travel underneath it. And it does speeds of up to about 100 miles an hour. Now, this is the way things are going to move, because China has a very specific problem, which is different from Europe and different to the United States. China has huge numbers of people and no space. So this is a solution to a situation where China is going to have many, many, many cities, over 20 million people. Okay, so how would I like to finish? Well, what should our attitude be towards this world that we see very rapidly developing before us? I think there'll be good things about it, and there'll be bad things about it. But I want to argue, above all, a big picture positive for this world. You know, for 200 years, the world was essentially governed by a fragment of the human population. That's what Europe and North America represented. The arrival of countries like China and India, between them 38% of the world's population, and others like Indonesia and Brazil and so on, represents the most important single act of democratization in the last 200 years. Civilizations and cultures which have been ignored, which had no voice, which were not listened to, which were not known about, will have a different sort of representation in this world. As humanists, we must welcome, surely, this transformation. And we will have to learn about these civilizations. This big ship here was the one sailed in by Zheng He in the early 15th century on his great voyages around the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and across the Indian Ocean to East Africa. The little boat in front of it was the one in which 80 years later Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic. Or, look carefully at this silk scroll made by Zhuzhou in 1368. I think they're playing golf. Christ, the Chinese even invented golf. Welcome to the future. Thank you.
The precision of a watch is a function of its movement. For Rolex and for Hans Wilsdorf, to guarantee the precision of a timepiece, the pressing question was how to protect the movement itself from the elements, not only water, but also tiny particles of dust. In 1926, a major step was taken with the creation of the world's first waterproof and dustproof wristwatch. The Rolex Oyster was born. Over the years, subtle changes in the design continue to improve the Oyster, adding more comfort while keeping the style contemporary. And, along with style, more functions have been added. A Rolex wristwatch was the first to show the date through a small aperture on the face. It was also the first wristwatch to spell out the day of the week in full. In the early 1950s, Rolex developed professional watches whose functions went far beyond telling the time. Launched in 1953, the Submariner was the first Rolex watch guaranteed waterproof to a depth of 330 feet. Already on an incredible journey of innovation and design, Rolex decided to push the boundaries even further. In 1960, the bathyscaphe Trieste and Rolex made history. The submersible successfully dived to 35,800 feet below the surface of the ocean. A Rolex Deep Sea Special was strapped to the outside. The development of undersea exploration led to the launching in 1967 of the Sea Dweller 2000, waterproof to a depth of 2,000 feet. In 2008, the Submariner in gold is redesigned and the case features a new unidirectional rotatable bezel with a Cerachrom disc. Fitted with the patented Rolex ringlock system, the Rolex Deep Sea safely descends to 12,800 feet. Rolex has incorporated countless hours and more than a century of experience, years of research, innovation and development into every one of its models. And the benefits arising from this work, including waterproofness, precision and durability, are the result of Rolex's continuous pursuit of perfection. From the most elegant and prestigious models to the professional timepieces, all are exquisitely crafted. Piece by piece, we design and manufacture every single watch. And the story continues.